So the white socks is Billy has made it a thing for where all guys wear white socks. All the players through the practice. You can't come with blue socks, green socks, orange socks. You have to have white socks. And everybody, apparently, it's again, it's starting with accountability, which we're going to break into even further than that. But it was just, I finally found it. It's a kind of a funny little thing, right? It's just like, who cares? It's just socks, right? Why does it matter if it matches? But it's starting with that momentum or the accountability part of it. Look, we're all going to be matching. We're all going to come in as uniform and as a team, wearing white socks. I believe it was Gervon Dexter and Osiris Torrance who kind of talked about it during their press conference where it was a thing like of importance, and they kind of laughed about it. But again, it starts with that. And the penalties part is a kind of a second part to that, a second notion where Billy went out and handed, and again, it's going to be a big discussion here about the whole Billy camp and what's happening. But I guess he went around and was handing out all of their penalties from the prior year, right? Their last year, basically reviewing like, hey, here's what you did wrong. Here's what you're going to prove. And a lot of the guys saying it was embarrassing of what they were like actually saw and how many times they messed up and made errors, etc. And so this got me thinking, right? This is kind of where the ball starts rolling. We're going to break this down a little bit. Steve and I to me, it seems like this should be happening all the time. For the fact that it's being written about and being spoke about, I know it's exciting, right? It's fun to see. And so this tells me two things. One was the lack of accountability and discipline that poor the last few years with Mullen, that any sign of it, we just get hooting and hollering about and we get excited about. Or is our reporting team on the 247 on 3 guys who cover and follow the Gators, are they bored and just excited to write about anything and trying to kind of drum up some good news and some good press about Billy? Or is it that groundbreaking, right? Which one is it? And that's kind of what we're going to unfold. So, Steve, I'm going to let you go first, kind of unpack this compared to what's going on in your camp, and tell me, what do you think this is?
Sure. I mean, look, first and foremost, anyone who uses the term hooting and hollering is always a number one in my book. I mean, I don't know if you can get more Southern than that term by itself. But look, I think we could see from some of the play on the Florida side last year, it felt like it didn't have direction. It felt like there was, just players that didn't have the discipline that you need to contend at the level that obviously, Florida wants to contend at, and Florida State as well. But that being said, look, I mean, you got a new coach coming in. These small details are what builds on the bigger picture. Being, Tom Coughlin, used to say at the Jaguars, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're already late. These little things start to build and they start to create a culture that not only the current players have, but then as new recruits come in that haven't even put on a pair of cleats yet, they understand what the culture is. And look, it may just sound like white socks, right? But it's a bigger mindset than that. It's a commitment to a bigger picture and doing the little things, exactly, and holding each other accountable and doing the little things it takes to make yourself successful in a large level. Because if all you're doing is shooting for the star and shooting for the goal at the top, you don't know how many steps it takes to get there. And I think Billy is doing a good job with just some of the minutia that sounds silly on the surface level, but that's what's going to get you long term where you want to go.
Yeah, so something, I mean, again, I talked about it on the Friday little press conference when I came in here, and I talked about how we can learn a lot from Billy, is just seeing how this is unfolding and developing, because it's the mindset of, you can't put on white socks every day to be a unit, to be cohesive with everybody, then how can I expect you to have my back in the middle of war, right? I mean, I know it sounds like, well, just put my socks on, but yeah, but you can't even wake up in the morning and throw on a pair of socks to match with the team. That's how little committed you are to this. And so you expect me to believe that you're going to be committed when the show's on and the lights are on? So it starts with that, and I think you really didn't, you kind of, politicked your way out of that. You didn't answer the question, Steve. I think it's more of, it's not that the on 3 and 247 is bored or whatever. I think it's been that lackluster of accountability and discipline for the past 4 years that it is that refreshing to see. And it's almost like we forgot what it was like, because I remember with watching the Mullen camp and just the games in general, it seemed like there was pockets of greatness that kind of just existed on the team, where it was their own little cliques, like in high school, right? It just felt very just multi-dimensional on who was on the field. It didn't seem like one team. And I didn't really care for it too much. I didn't think about it too much. I really never got too involved, but it definitely felt more disconnected than, let's say, like the 08 team, where it was just like, yo, that's a unit, right? Like everybody just kind of seemed dialed in with one another. This, again, the last 4 years, I didn't mind. Like I said, the reason I didn't mind it because we were winning games, we were doing well outside of obviously the last 2 years of the Mullen camp, but we were winning football games. We kind of felt like we were back. So I was like, who cares? Let the kids be themselves. I didn't mind it too much because also Mullen was new. It was like the honeymoon stage. So we overlooked some of those things. But we realize now that was the cancer slowly starting to build and grow that obviously has now put us into the situation where the best players on our team are transfers, right? Our best O-line, Torrance, transfer. Arguably our best wide receiver, which, I think it's a shoo-in. Obviously, he got the number 1 jersey, is Ricky, right? And then arguably would be obviously the running back room with Montrell Johnson be the number 1. All those are transfers. Now, that's not an issue, right? If you have back-to-back 5, top 10 recruiting classes, and then you have that on top of that, then you're killing it. But that transfer is making you worth something. So that's where, again, all of that kind of comes into play with the accountability part. So it's refreshing. Is it a big deal? Can it make a difference? I think yes. It's like I said, it starts at the bottom, and that's literally your feet, right? Starts from here and it comes up. So if we can get this part right, we get this part right, and so on. And it's the small W's. We had this too at work with Don, right? It's getting up in the morning, creating 3 things, first thing that you're going to do every single morning, right? Whether it be you go for a mile run, you take a shower, and you write in a journal, right? And you create those habits. So when you wake up and you get 3 W's every single morning when you wake up, it's the whole making the bed mentality, right? You're getting a W as soon as you wake up. Putting those socks on and knowing that we're all synced up and in unison is getting the W from the rip. They're already 2 steps ahead of everybody else that's coming onto that field because we've already got a W today. And that's what it feels like where, the camp is headed. And it's very exciting for us.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Look, I mean, and certainly not to dance around the specifics of what Billy's trying to do there. But to answer your question about the reporting side of things, look, I don't know if that level of detail was there with Mullen. But for Florida, like, you've got a new coach, there's a new level of energy. You're finding things like, the White Sox and just these attention to detail pieces that are newsworthy. Were they there before? Maybe, but I don't think Mullen was exactly the best face for what the University of Florida wants to be. I feel like Billy is a representation of what Florida, the football team in the school, is and wants to be. I mean, he just seems like he's more of a genuine guy. So, like, it could be just that there's a new energy. It could be that there's more stories. Or it could just be that you're seeing somebody who's a little bit more genuine than your last coach who, after he left, comes to find out he wasn't probably the best guy, not only for the school, but maybe sometimes in general as a person, according to potentially some of the prior assistants.
So are you referring to the video?
Yeah, and I don't know how much to take of it, but man, that guy was passionate. He was super passionate about it.
He was referring to kind of how the Mullen camp left the assistant coach situation, but again, it's obviously it's like the nasty ex relationship, the nasty ex girlfriend. It was obviously a disaster, but again, the whole White Sox and the penalties thing, it's good, it's cool, it's exciting to see, it's great to see it. Again, like the shoe throwing incident, right? That's been a big thing that we constantly talk about, we constantly are reminded of. It's stuff like that, right? That at the time. Again, I wasn't even thinking about it. I wasn't even mad when it happened. Like the young side of me enjoys that excitement, enjoys that the fieriness in a player to grab a shoe and throw it across the field, right? But I also know that lacks discipline, it lacks accountability, because you have to know that if I do this, it's going to hurt myself and the team, right? As much as like it's who cares, it's not a big deal. There's rules in place. You have to follow the rules, and if you have discipline and you're all wearing white socks, that shoe throw doesn't happen. As crazy as it sounds, but I look, we're gonna have penalties. There's gonna be errors, but I can almost guarantee. I'll bite my tongue if I'm wrong here, but I can almost guarantee with a team that they haven't even, this team that's here hasn't been recruited by Billy or the coaching staff, right? So they've got to come in and win these guys all over again and create a whole new standard. So there's definitely going to be penalties and errors and mistakes. I totally get that. But that's what we have to be focused on. That's how we judge this coming year, right? Where are the penalties? Not necessarily on wins and losses, right? It's the discipline and the accountability on the field because, again, none of these kids were recruited by these coaches. So they're having to learn them in a matter of, 8 to 9 months, learn and win them over in 8 to 9 months, right? They didn't recruit them based on what they thought. They're being dealt with it. So everybody is going to be held accountable, right, on both sides, the players, how they're going to retrieve, and how the coaches respond to that as well. So it's going to be fun to watch. And, again, I think that's we as fans, and we keep preaching this, have to realize we have to look for the W's in the right places. It's not necessarily going to be on the scoreboard where the W is going to be, right? It's going to be on the field, on the reactions, on how they carry themselves through wins and losses, how they're handling themselves in pressure situations with penalties, false starts, unnecessary pass interference calls, right? That, to me, is where I'm going to be focusing on, especially game one. 100% game one. Obviously, we all want a W. And I think those things are going to help win the W, right? Lack of, cutting down penalties, cutting down false starts, cutting down pass interferences, cutting down just dummy mishaps in general are going to lead us to having the better option of winning. But that, to me, is going to be the focus for this year.
Yeah, look, and there are two types of penalties, right? And you can have a penalty where you just physically get beat by a guy and you've got to hold him in order to keep him from crushing your quarterback. And so there's a holding penalty, but you just got beat, right? Like this guy just beat you on the play. That's different than, if you pick up some kid's shoe and you chuck it 60 yards down the field. That's a mental error. That's a mental breakdown. Sometimes in football, you are going to get beat on a play, and the only way to break it up and the only way to potentially stop something catastrophic from happening, like potentially your quarterback getting blindsided or getting beat on a route that leaves a guy wide open, is to either interfere or hold. Sometimes penalties are a necessary part of the game to stop something larger from happening. It's not those penalties that I think that Florida needs to be focused on. I think it's the ones where there's a decision-making component involved. Did you make the right decision in that scenario? And that'll be really, if just kind of looking at the White Sox concept and is the discipline there, is the accountability there? I think you got to separate those two, right? I mean, if it's a false start penalty in a raucous environment, maybe the guy couldn't hear or didn't catch the snap count.
Sure.
Different than something else. But I mean, like, they're two different things. You can kind of separate them if you're watching football. If you keep up with football enough, you definitely know the difference between whether or not you took that extra 2 steps as a defensive end to hit the quarterback when you didn't have to. Those are mindset penalties. There's difference there, but I would keep an eye on that.
Pass interference, obviously, like those penalties, like what you're saying is like that sometimes isn't necessarily a mental decision. It's it's bang bang, and you got the short end of the stick. I get that. False starts, it just depends. I'm 50-50 on that. I get what you're saying. Those are tough. That to me is discipline and accountability.
At home, it's discipline. And like, if you're in front of 100,000 fans,
they're going to happen, right? It's inevitable, but it's the range and how many times it's happening, and do you allow the one to lead to 2 to 3 more, right? It's being able to check it and get it locked in order and learning from it quickly. Having the the memory of a goldfish. Forget about it. Let's move on. It happened. I mean, not necessarily even a goldfish, because you want to remember that it happened, but you want to be able to learn from it and grow. And I think that's where we've struggled over the last 4 years, is that it felt like the team would kind of almost just hang on to it, and it would just carry the stench through the rest of the game. So, look, I think losing to teams like South Carolina and UCF, you lose to those games. You lose those games and to those teams because of that. There's no reason why Florida should be losing those games. Talent-wise, we had it all. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, especially with Dameon Pierce. The guy's balling out in the NFL right now. And I think that we just – look, man, I don't know. I'm ready for the season to start, because I feel like it's a lot of talking. It's a lot of what-ifs and a lot of what's going to happen with Billy, and it's just a lot of talking right now. And we're just got to wait. Everything looks good. Everything sounds good. Everything feels good. But because I was going back and looking at the Mullen stuff, and we all felt the same way when Mullen first came in, right? It was just that honeymoon stage. So it's just, I'm ready to get the ball going. We've talked about it for so long now. I feel like it's just like I'm just beating that
This is
horse
the worst
about
time of year.